Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Three different things have happened today and let's see how they connect. Number one, there are some early signs that things are de-escalating on the India-China border issue in Ladakh. Number two, there is also an indication that in Nepal, the drastic step the Nepalese were taking of issuing a new map of Nepal, including not just 35 square kilometers of territory with India, Lipulekh Pass, that they've been claiming for a long time, but lots more, extending it to 336 square kilometers, that is 10 times of their traditional claim. That map was to be passed by the Nepalese parliament through a constitutional amendment that has now been put off for now. And third thing, this is also Jawaharlal Nehru's death anniversary. Now, how do we connect all this? First of all, Jawaharlal Nehru, it's easy to tell you why, because the border dispute with China is a legacy of his reign. Not only is it a legacy of his reign, it's also the big negative of his reign. Now, in the popular view, in general, even Nehru's supporters say that, look, he might have done many things right, but he really messed up on China. Then it depends on which side you are on. You can either say, if you didn't like Nehru to begin with and you don't like him now, you can say he messed up because he was woolly-headed, he did not understand the needs of India's defense, he trusted China too much. But many of his fans would tell you, many of his fans who disagree with his handling of China would tell you that his problem wasn't quite that. His problem was that he listened to too many people at that point, did not go with his instinct, and he was not able to deal with the hawks within his own party. There was no BJP or RSS or Jan Sangh. RSS and Jan Sangh were there and they were making their statements, but they were really not carrying so much leverage at that point. So those issues have then carried on and festered and festered and festered, although the two countries over the past 3 decades, in fact, the first signs of reconciliation started coming in Rajiv Gandhi's times. They have brought about some sense of normalcy. So these three things. Now, first of all, why do we say that there might be some signs of de-escalation? So there is a statement by Lijian Zhao. Now, Lijian Zhao is an interesting character. He is Chinese government spokesperson. Before that, he was number 2 in the Chinese embassy in Islamabad. And he's quite famous. He's a Twitter star in the sense that he follows tens of thousands of people. Until recently used to follow me also. Now for some reason he's sort of given up on me. And a lot of people follow him. And quite uncharacteristic of a Chinese diplomat, he is very outspoken on Twitter. Outspoken means bordering on the abusive sometimes. And he is very often the voice or Twitter handle through which the Chinese conduct the most, say, the Trump-like part of their foreign policy, using the kind of language that you might use in the Trumpian world. So Lijian Zhao, who had, short of calling Alice Wells a mad person, he had said nasty things about her when she, in her statement, she is a US State Department senior official, who had made a statement that China is bullying its neighbors, including India, by trying to change the status quo on the border. He has today said that the situation is overall stable and controllable, and he has said we are capable of resolving the issues through dialogue and control it. Now, this coming from him in China is generally being construed as something that says there is going to be calm, but you don't know. If you see the history of India-China border standoffs, they go on for a long time. Nobody fires a shot, at least not since 1967, but they fester for a long time. Sumdurong Chu in 1986-7, it went on for a long time. In fact, New York Times had a long story then. I was then in Washington And I read that story and I also got scared. It was 1987, I think. And it reported their correspondent quoting sources who apparently had seen endless convoys of army, not just trucks, but artillery, guns, etc., going up the Tibetan highways. So, from that point also, the two countries came back, but that took a long time. Recently, we saw Doklam went on for 73 days, Shumar before that. So, Chinese do it for various reasons. So far, it's quite evident that nobody wants to fire a shot. In this case, in Ladakh, things have gone to one level where two sides have physically attacked each other in terms of exchanging fisticuffs and throwing stones at each other. Now, you might laugh at this crazy situation of two of the world's most populous countries, China the number one, India number two, soon to be exchanging places. Unfortunately for India, India will become number one. That is not a distinction that India wants, to be number one in terms of population, but two most populous countries in the world, each one holding about a sixth of humanity, with nuclear weapons, with huge armies, are throwing stones at each other. So, it has gone on from complete peace to a little bit of escalation in terms of, don't laugh, we can't laugh because the joke's on us, stone throwing and fisticuffs. So, don't presume that this is going to unwind immediately, but you can see that there is something happening there. And again, on the Nepalese side, you've had this delay in the passing of the constitutional amendment. This has been essentially caused, and you should read Nayanema Bose's story on the print on this, for which we will give you a link with the description today. That says that this is because the Madhesi parties, now Madhesis are people, as we know, in the plains region of Nepal bordering India. And there's always been a Madhesi, non-Madhesi issue in Nepal. Those parties have said that, okay, we are okay with this map, we like these claims, we agree on these border claims, because nobody would go against what is now a nationalistic fervor in Nepal. But we want better representation for ourselves from Madhesis in the system, constitution making, etc., etc., etc. So, to that extent, they have delayed it. Now, India also has influence in Nepal. I don't know more about it. When I know more about it, I'll let you know. But the fact is that you can see an immediate de-escalation, at least for now, there as well. And India has issued a very mature statement saying that border issues are sensitive and our countries know, Nepal and India, how to handle those. So, that's where we are in the middle of all this. You know, since I am standing on the edge of Old Delhi का language में बोलेगा तू कौन मैं खाम खां, right? Or the other more popular one in the Hindi heartland and maybe even nationally is Begane ki shaadi mein Abdullah Diwana. So, who's that Abdullah Diwana? That is Donald Trump. In the middle of all this, he has tweeted offering to mediate and arbitrate between India and China. Now, first of all, I don't know where can he mediate and arbitrate. He has 165 days for his own elections. And nobody trusts him now institutionally in terms of American commitments to anything. Second, if India is his natural strategic ally, then why is he offering to mediate and not reflecting the words of his own senior State Department official who said China is bullying India and trying to change the status quo? And third, what's there to arbitrate? And fourth, where is the need for him to speak on this? But then again, Begane ki shaadi mein Abdullah Diwana. If there's a wedding going on and people are dancing, so Donald Trump also has to come and do his own stuff in the middle. That is what's happened. But it just looks like there's a little bit of a theatre of the absurd playing out in a very serious situation. So once again, if this has to be resolved, this will be done patiently. My sense is this will be resolved, or maybe that's also my hope. but this has to be done patiently behind the scenes. We cannot go back to 1962 and start fighting for the same posts again, because 65, 68 years have gone between then and now. For 68 years, so much water has flown down the Shyok and Galwan rivers that you can't go back to 1962. So that's where we are now. Why Nehru? Now, researching this, I come up with a wonderful article that Anant Krishnan of the Hindu. Anant Krishnan speaks Chinese. He's worked in China. He was the Hindu's correspondent in China. He's now at a think tank. He also worked with us when I joined India Today briefly. So we had him join India Today as its Beijing correspondent. He is among the smartest correspondents on journalists or commentators on China in a long time. Definitely in India, probably the smartest and the best informed, language being an ally. So he in 2012 wrote a story in the Hindu. And in that story was based on two declassified documents. Now, first of all, it's quite a surprise that in China also they declassify their really important documents after some time passes. So China declassified a bunch of its foreign policy documents between 1949 and 1965. So two documents there are about Zhou Enlai's visit to India in 1960. Now in 1960, Zhou Enlai made a very important visit to India where it looks like he did offer India a peace deal, a border swap deal, which was rejected. In fact, if you see a tweet by Nirupama Rao, our former foreign secretary who served in China, who understands the situation, she says that the 1960 deal that Zhou Enlai offered is now like a dream. It's a chimera. Obviously it will not come again. So there was a deal on offer. So there is a note that the Chinese government wrote before his visit on April 1, 1960, and one after he returned on April 31, 1960, within the same month, day 1 and the last day of the same month. This was the last opportunity that Nehru also had of avoiding war and China had of avoiding war. At the end of this, if you see those notes, the Chinese made the assessment that India does not want a settlement, that India prefers a confrontation. Now, that can be a complete misunderstanding, but when scars on your minds develop about each other, then you make those conclusions. That 1960 visit, if you read this carefully, the report, and I am also giving a link to the entire report by Anant Krishnan, it tells you that the visit was quite acrimonious, because by this time the Chinese had begun to get disillusioned with India even on ideological grounds. So April 1 note, for example, says that India is looking down the barrel, my words, not in the note, looking down the barrel, it's doing very badly. The 1956 5-year plan has failed. India's economy is in a mess. India is becoming more and more dependent on Western powers, particularly America. And in India now, bourgeois are rising in power. China was quite an ideological communist state at that point. So that's what the April 1 note says. The April 31 note, on the other hand, goes a step ahead and says, look, this India looks like it wants war, or it wants something on the borders because it thinks that China does not have the will to fight them. As I told you, scars on the mind develop when two sides start misunderstanding each other. And then uses an expression again from Anant Krishnan's piece, I am quoting it. It said, India is now, or Indian state obviously, is like a mother without milk, which means its people want something, they are hungry for something, which Indian state is not able to give them. And because it's not able to give them, then usual, although it's not said that way, but implication must be that that's why India wants to escalate things. Now, this is a fact that on that visit, Zhou Enlai offered a deal. The deal, as we understand it, from all the reading from that period, including the book by Natwar Singh and many other accounts by many other people, because a lot of the officials at that point were quite scholarly and kept their notes as well. And I've also had long conversations with Mr. Jagat Mehta, who later rose to the level of secretary, but the legendary diplomat who handled China at that period. And whatever I've heard from them and whatever I've read in these texts, tell you that the deal Zhou Enlai had indicated was that India accepts the Chinese ownership of Aksai Chin in Ladakh, and China gives up its claims on Arunachal Pradesh, or what was then NEFA, Northeastern Frontier Agency, although Zhou Enlai never stated it clearly. So Ananth Krishnan reports a reference from R.K. Nehru's writings, who says that Zhou Enlai said, "In the East a settlement can be found. Our aim is to explore ways of a settlement." So that's as close as you can come to an understanding that a deal was on offer. 25th of April 1960 was the final meeting between Zhou Enlai and Nehru, by which time acrimony had risen. Now, you can see, if you read accounts of that period, because we are talking about Nehru, Nehru did not run a cabinet in the way cabinets are run today. Other people in the cabinet also had a voice, and very often Nehru found himself overruled by some of the others. Also, he never, maybe it was a personality flaw, maybe he was too much of a Democrat. His fans will say too much of a Democrat. His adversaries will say indecisive and woolly-headed, or some would say that maybe he did not want to ruffle anybody's feathers. They were hawks within his cabinet, and it is true that he requested Zhou Enlai to go and meet some of them individually, to persuade them and to win them over to the idea of a border settlement. Obviously, because Nehru and Krishna Menon wanted a settlement. Now, Zhou Enlai went to see Govind Ballabh Pant. From what I understand, that meeting was quite acrimonious. He got lectured to. Then he went to see Morarji Desai, who was then finance minister, and essentially consistently cutting defense budgets down to nothing. And Morarji Desai was admonishing Zhou Enlai in that meeting. And Morarji Desai said to Zhou Enlai, and this is from Natwar Singh's accounts quoted by Ananth Krishnan, he said that you are unjust. And Zhou Enlai got fed up when Morarji called him unjust on the question of Tibet, because Morarji was talking about the question of Tibet, because there was a Tibet nostalgia in India. And Zhou Enlai in exasperation said, I have had enough. And Morarji Desai responded to that by saying, more than enough. So it was in meetings like this that you can see that the die was cast. It was Nehru's strength or weakness. You can figure that out, because this is something that history will assess all the time, that he let his cabinet ministers have such a say over these issues. In fact, the accounts I have heard of Zhou Enlai's meetings with Govind Ballabh Pant are much more colorful than this. It's just that I don't find that documented yet anywhere, so I can't share those with you, because that will be much too anecdotal. But the fact is that he went back angry and thinking that India did not want peace. Now, many people who've been watching India-China relations think that that was the best opportunity. So Nehru, when history assesses him at any point, his dealings with China are held against him. Whether he was a hawk or a dove, woolly-headed or too much of a Democrat, all those debates will continue. But the fact is that net he messed up with China, and his cabinet was divided. There was Krishna Menon, and we had spoken about this in our Kattak letter 366. I will again give you the link today, where we had said that Krishna Menon's view was that Pakistan is the biggest threat to India, that India can have peace with China. And so he was seen to be a Sinophile, and within his cabinet, there was a left-right divide. And by that time, Krishna Menon was very unpopular for many other reasons as well. Also, General Thimayya was of the view that India should find some kind of a settlement, some kind of peace with China, because Pakistan was a bigger threat. So this was the history of a fascinating period, which is again revisiting us in the same places, oddly. Hot springs, where the Chinese have intruded into territory that India considers its own right now. Hot springs is exactly where the first India-China clash took place earlier on in 1959 on 21st of October. That is where 10 soldiers of CRPF, then there was no ITBP, 10 soldiers of CRPF who were on patrol there, they were ambushed and they were killed. That's why 21st October is observed in India as the National Police Martyrs Memorial Day. So this is the complicated history, and because it's Nehru's anniversary and the same places are in news again, we thought we'll revisit this story for you. Now, before I go away, I told you that we'll now occasionally or often share some graphics with you on the corona situation. So we have looked at the coronavirus situation in India from a different metric today. And you can see these graphics done by Shipra Kapoor. So this metric is rating the states or color coding the states on the basis of how much are they testing per million population. So these are not dumb numbers. A small state can have a small number of tests, a large state can have a large number of tests, still have very few tests on a per million basis. So we are ranking the states or color coding the states on per million basis. The darker the color on this map of India, the higher the test numbers in that state. So you can see in this map, and then you see two bar charts also. Jammu and Kashmir is number 1 in India for testing, 9,862 tests per million people. Well done, Jammu Kashmir. Delhi is number 2, 9,544. Well done, Delhi. There's a little complication there because Bombay is higher than Delhi. It's just that Bombay is part of, Mumbai is part of Maharashtra. So Delhi is 9,544. It's a state. Andhra Pradesh comes third, 5,835. Tamil Nadu, a close fourth, 5,414. So 5,835, 5,414 per million population. And little Tripura, with a population of a few million, well done, 5,005 per million. And then I will reverse this role of honor. So I will tell you the top from the bottom. So who's the last one? These are the wooden spoon candidates. The last in the list is Bihar, 510 per million. It's a large state, very few tests. Number 2 from the bottom is the usual suspect. Could have been 1, but Bihar, after initially testing for some time, seems to have slowed down, so got that number 1, dubious number 1 spot. Telangana is number 2, as I said, usual suspect, 594 per million. Remember, its neighbor Andhra Pradesh is number 3 from the top at 5,835. Telangana is 594. That is approximately 1/10, 10% of the tests that Andhra is conducting. Uttar Pradesh is the third from the bottom, 990. Still about twice as much as Bihar and almost twice as much as Telangana. Jharkhand, a poor state, 1,260. Again, 2.5 times of Bihar. And West Bengal then, 1,486. So these are the 4 from the bottom. And the first list I gave you was 5 from the bottom, and they were 5 from the top. So this is one more metric to look at today.